Surprise! 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 Unpackage? Unpackage! Already? Another package video? Another package video! Another unpackage video! Awesome stuff. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this today. I really wasn't. I had just finished doing something and all of a sudden I see an Amazon Prime truck outside of my place. I was like, oh, is that for me or is that for someone else? It was for me. Surprise! Anyhow, this is awesome. This is progress. Stuff that I ordered that was supposed to take 1 to 3 weeks, which is only taking a couple of days. Progress, everyone. Progress. Or for other people that pronounce it differently, progress. Anyhow, that an opener. I did an unpackaging video earlier today, yeah. So, get ready for a bonus video today. Yeah! Which one is this? Alright. Ah, yes, it's that one. Final Fantasy 12 for the PS2, PlayStation 2. Awesome stuff. Now, I remember... Okay, I have to talk about another game for this to be understood, so that you guys understand this. Okay, so back in the day, I went into a video game, which wasn't a Final Fantasy game. It wasn't. Dragon Quest VIII for the PS2. Yup. And then I actually I loved Dragon Quest VIII. I loved it to the point where I actually bought a physical copy at that point in time. And what did it come with? A demo disc of Final Fantasy 12. I tried the demo disc back then. Hated this game. Hated this with a passion. And then, now, today, a couple of weeks back, I popped in that demo. What did I think? What do I think about it now? I was actually really enjoying myself with it. I thought it was actually really good, very good at times. Within the demo, I was like, huh, my opinions about this game have majorly, drastically changed. And even within the demo, I have to admit, it doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy game. It doesn't. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's actually, from what I played in the demo, it's actually very good. And there are other Final Fantasy games that I have to admit, I love them, but do I think of them as Final Fantasy? No. Final Fantasy X does not feel like a Final Fantasy game whatsoever. Yet it's still a great game. I think if it still had major success. But the thing is, if they didn't call it Final Fantasy and they called it something else, if it didn't build a Final Fantasy name, it probably would have done a lot better. Same thing with Final Fantasy 13. What do I think about the game? I think like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy 13, extremely linear. But doesn't mean that it's bad. It can still be great. And it was, to me personally, I do think Final Fantasy 13 on the PS3 was actually great. But again, it did not feel like a Final Fantasy whatsoever. So, Final Fantasy 12, yeah. And some might say Final Fantasy X is when Final Fantasy took it home for the Wolves. Final Fantasy 9, 6, 7, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5. Yeah, we all have our differences. We all have our preferences on when we think Final Fantasy started going downhill. My personal thought is it started going downhill with Final Fantasy X. But that being said, I don't think Final Fantasy X is a bad game. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy. So I just wanted to share my experiences with you guys about the Final Fantasy games. What I think, and everything. I personally feel Final Fantasy IX was the last true Final Fantasy game. Yeah. And Final Fantasy IX, to me personally, is a masterpiece. Masterpiece. So going from Final Fantasy IX to Final Fantasy X, me and my brother, when we first went to Final Fantasy X, we had high hopes. High hopes for Final Fantasy X after coming off of 9. Man, were we wrong. My brother hated the game. I very much enjoyed the game. I thought 10 was actually pretty damn good. I thought it was great at times. But the thing that... Sorry everyone, my nose is going. But the thing that is... I have to agree that Final Fantasy X took it home for the worse. And it's not the bad on the story. I think the story was great. It was how it was delivered. Bad voice direction. I do not blame the voice actors whatsoever. Because they went on and did great things after Final Fantasy X. And some, even before Final Fantasy X, and did great things beforehand. And the reason why, I don't blame the voice actors. I don't. I blame the voice direction. The voice direction. That was the worst thing about the game. The worst thing about the game. Oh, wait. Let's show off the disc. Final Fantasy 12. So I'm looking forward to playing this. Yeah. And finally, I have Final Fantasy 12. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. I knew when I got this, I wanted to share my feelings about the Final Fantasy games. And I'm really sorry to say this to the hardcore fans of Final Fantasy games. Okay, so first of all, I gotta say, you know what? Let's extend this video a bit longer, and let me show my entire feelings of Final Fantasy games in general. Okay, the first one for the NES. Back in the day, I played it when I was a kid. It was one of my first RPG games I ever played. I grew up with the NES. A lot. And that one, back then, I did not mind it. I didn't like it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It was an okay game. Nowadays, I hate it. I can't stand it on the NES. To me, personally, if you want to play a good version of the game, go to the Game Boy Advance. To me personally, that's where they mastered the game. And yet, even over there, I thought it was good. That was it. And to me personally, I'm really sorry to say this, I would even have to say stay away from the PS1 version. That one just, no. Final Fantasy, okay, let's go on to Final Fantasy 2. The first time I played Final Fantasy 2, believe it or not, was actually on the PS1. When we got the Final Fantasy Origins. Didn't like it. Not one bit. Again, this is where the GBA version really holds up a lot more. Because I found myself not minding it on the Game Boy Advance. Not minding it. Final Fantasy 3, which I've never played, ever played. The actual Final Fantasy 3, which was for the NES originally, in Japan, like Final Fantasy 2, in Japan, only Japan! 'Cause, 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 'cause Yeah. And then going on to Final Fantasy IV on the Super Nintendo, when it first was released, we knew it as Final Fantasy II. No, technically it wasn't 2, it was 4. The only reason why... Sorry, but my nose is really going now. Don't know why. The only reason why they named it 2 and not 4 is because what's the confusion going to be for when people actually buy it in the US, Canada? Because we only had one other Final Fantasy game that ever came out here. One other one. And believe it or not, Mystic Quest, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is not really a Final Fantasy game. They just slapped Final Fantasy name on it. That's number one. Number two, I still consider it, even though technically that's how that game actually turned out to be, I still consider it as a Final Fantasy game, but that wasn't released until afterwards. Final Fantasy IV, aka 2, was released on Super Nintendo before Mystic Quest was released, believe it or not. In, I want to say, 1991. I could be wrong about that. 91 or 92. I think it was 91. I think it was the year of the Super Nintendo release year. Yeah. And back then, I fell in love with the game completely. Completely fell in love with the game. I thought it was great, and to this day, I still hold that game on the pedestal that I've always had it on. Because it was the first RPG where I was like, that really drew me in. The first one. That was the first one. Oh yeah, and they only released it here as 2 because, like I said, we never got any of the other ones at that time. So they decided to do it as Final Fantasy 2 and not 4. I can understand that, but then later on, when it got released on the PS1 on the Final Fantasy Chronicles, which I do have in my drawer. I own Chronicles, and Trilogy now, as you guys saw, not the last Unpackaging video, but the one before. Yeah. Yeah. And so basically, I love that game. On the PS1, I loved it even though. But the PS1 is the hardest version of the game thus far. Okay, going on to Final Fantasy V. Believe it or not, the first time I ever played Final Fantasy V was, sorry to say this, everyone, but it was not on the PS1. Not on the PS1. It was on the Super Nintendo. You guys might be like, but it never got released in English here. No official English release. No, it didn't. And sad to say, it was at a time when, well, I shouldn't say at a time. There were people out there that made an English ROM hack of the game. From Japanese to English. And you can still find it online. And Final Fantasy V on the Super Nintendo, like I said, was my first time. And it was actually at the time I thought it was good when I first played it. And then over the years, I played it a bit more, and I found myself being drawn into it more and more as the years went by. And so now, I hold Final Fantasy V on the pedestal too. I think Final Fantasy V, for what it's worth, is a great game. A great game. It doesn't live up to some of the other ones, but still a great game nonetheless. Alright, going on to Final Fantasy VI, which was originally known as Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo. And like I've already stated, you all should know why. But based on Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy VI, aka 3 on the Super Nintendo. Again, I fell in love with the game. I thought it was a great game. And at the time, I couldn't figure out what was my more favorite one, Final Fantasy 6 or Final Fantasy 4, aka 3 or aka 2 for Super Nintendo. Because they both had their perks, they both had their weaknesses. But that being said, like, it's so hard to pick between the two, so hard to pick. If you go by the storyline, yeah, Final Fantasy 6, much better. If you go by the gameplay, however, I prefer the fourth one. Yeah. Oh wait, going on to Final Fantasy 7. We're starting to move on, everyone. This was one of the first games that I ever played on the PS1. Final Fantasy 7, ladies and gentlemen. Final Fantasy 7. It's what made me and my brother me and my brother come up with the money between him and me, and we combined it, and we bought the PS1 for ourselves. Yeah. And it was a great decision because we got great games on the PS1. Some great games were released on the PS1 for us here in Canada, which would be aka the US as well. Final Fantasy 7 is what I personally think is when the downfall of the Final Fantasy games started. Final Fantasy 7, don't get me wrong, great game. But there's one flaw in the game. Actually, no, wait a minute, there's two flaws in the game that I'm now thinking about. Two flaws in the game. Great graphics for its time. I still love those graphics. I know some people hate the graphics that they use in the game. I still love them. The storyline, amazing. What's my gripe with the game then? The gameplay a little. For the most part, the gameplay is actually pretty awesome. But there's one aspect to it that I do not care for. And what was that? The magic system. The magic setup. Oh boy, did they ever screw that up. To me, personally, the best magic system was in Final Fantasy 4. But don't get me wrong, I think 5 did a great job with it. 6 even did a great job with it. 7 was going overboard. It was going to the extreme, and that's where my brain would shut off, for the most part, was the magic system, the magic setup. Reason why most of the times when you see me playing Final Fantasy 7, I choose not to use magics. I just flat out go all attacks. The magic setup system, I don't know why they did what they did. I don't. And quite frankly, that system should not have been there. It shouldn't have been there. Going on to another gripe. The side quests. Oh, did I majorly hate the side quests in that game? Did I ever? Final Fantasy 6 has side quests, but it was to a point where it felt like it was part of the story. Final Fantasy 7, it did not do that. It didn't feel like part of the story. It just felt side quests. Annoying, God-forsaken side quests that were really, really bad. Yeah. One in particular was breeding chocobos, racing chocobos, all because to get wait, a golden chocobo. That way you could go all around the Final Fantasy world. Hey, we're gonna do that if you do this. Yeah. Oh wait, However, you can get a golden chocobo by doing something else. Yeah, you don't have to do all that bullshit chocobo stuff to get a golden chocobo. No. That's my gripe with that game. Final Fantasy VIII was, from Final Fantasy VII to Final Fantasy VIII, it was a major step back. It was a major... I don't hold that game on a pedestal as 7, 6, and you all just hold my gripes on 7, 9, 4. I don't. 5. I really, really don't. The only thing great about the game of Final Fantasy VIII is the story. And yes, still, the story had a lot of major plot holes, but I still very much enjoyed it. Like most people did. Graphics. For its time and type, I would have to... for its time and type. For its time, I would have to say it was great, but how they did it was such a disappointment. Such a disappointment. Oh, wait. We're gonna show off the best of the best graphics in the beginning of the game and decrease it as you go along in the game. More, decrease it some more as you go along. Decrease it some more. Decrease it. That's what they did, and that's stupid. That's so stupid. It should start off as the weakest graphics of the game at the beginning, and gradually gets better and better and better throughout the game as you are playing the game. Yeah, they didn't do that. They didn't. The gameplay factor. The gameplay. Within the battle screen, I would have to say they did actually a great job on that. But the setup on how to... the setup of everything else, plus the fact that you cannot overpower your characters, which I bloody hate, because you should be able to. You should be able to. But instead they went with, oh no, the enemies will be at your level. And that's what they did throughout the entire game. That's not how it's supposed to be. Not how it's supposed to be. But that being said, moving on to 9. And 9 remedied it completely. Completely. Final Fantasy 9 is my most favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. And I would consider it as probably one of my top 5 video games of all time. Of all time. Maybe not my top number 1, but it's within my top 5. Oh yes. And I would have to say, everything about the game is just great. It's just great. From the gameplay, to the graphics, to the story. Oh my god. Amazing. Amazing. There is my gripe on one scene in the game. One scene. But it's not a major gripe. It's just a little gripe. They made us having to buy multiple weapons and armor, and then going to another store, mashing them up together to do an upgrade, to get a better sword, a better shield, armor. Why did they do that? Why? And to me personally, it's not a bad way to go, but at the same time, it is a bit annoying. Just a little bit annoying. But that's my only gripe with the game. Only gripe. And I normally don't mention it because it's something that I'm willing to look past it. I'm willing to look past it. Final Fantasy X. coming from 9 to 10, we said had such high hopes, and what do we get? A major letdown. Like I said before, my brother hated Final Fantasy X. He did. And I very much enjoyed it. I did. I finally beat the game a couple of years ago. I finally beat the game for the first time. And it shows that I can actually finally master it. I had problems trying to understand the setup originally, way back in the day. And I had so much problems trying to figure out the setup for the most part for a long time. Until I saw someone's walkthrough, Dave the Usher's walkthrough of Final Fantasy X, and he explained it quite a lot. And he showed us that it's not as complicated as they're making it out to be. Now it's like, and so I paid attention to his walkthrough because of that. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, going on to the next. You guys all know how I feel about the game. I already said it early on in this video. So going on to the next one. Final Fantasy XI will be the next one. I remember scrounging up money with a friend of mine, with a buddy of mine that loved the Final Fantasy game, Chris, and Final Fantasy XI was a major letdown. It's either people hated it right off the bat. I did. It was an online Final Fantasy game. Why? Just why? Because online is a hip new scene. Yeah! That's why. And it did not work. Like I said before, it's either people hated it right away, or they loved it for about a week, and then they hated it. Yeah. So Final Fantasy XI has been really forgotten by most gamers out there. Most gamers. Not all. There are still some minor little fans out there. But if you talk to most Final Fantasy gamers, they will tell you that no, 11 is garbage. Going on to Final Fantasy 12. Like I said, I've never played this game fully. This is my chance to play it fully. I've only played the demo back in the day. Hated it. Played the demo again not too long ago. I actually did not mind it. So I'm actually looking forward to this. I really am. Final Fantasy 13 Trilogy. So much to say here. Final Fantasy 13 has a lot of major problems. There's so many bad things about the game. But is it really bad? Gotta say no. It's not bad at all. It's actually a very good game. Not an amazing game, but a very good game though. And I've heard people smashing Final Fantasy 13 to bits. And I've heard their complaints. And I agree with all their complaints. But doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. The battle system, in the battle scenes themselves, it was actually quite good. And the setup, they took the setup from Final Fantasy X and they made it easier to understand. It was easier to navigate, easier to do things. Yeah, and I gotta say, it's a basic setup. Sometimes that is great. If it's just a basic setup, so people don't have to be confused whatsoever on how the gameplay works. Yeah. And it was great this time around. But the thing is, the game is full of tutorials. Why? 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 They made it more complicated than what it actually is. And that's what happened with Final Fantasy X. Yeah. They made it more complicated than what it actually is. Not white, not white. And I beat the game. I beat the game on the hardest way possible. Hardest way possible. They're sticking with the Custodium, sticking with the original weapons that you get at the beginning of the game. Yup. That's what I did. And I beat the game with just that. Just that alone. I didn't upgrade anything. I didn't attach things to the weapons or the 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece they wanted the game of armor. I didn't attach anything to them. I kept it as is. I beat it on the hardest way possible, and yeah, I'm proud of myself for doing that. I am. And I would have to say, I'm glad I did that because it made it challenging at times. It made it challenging, but I still beat it. I still beat it on the hardest way possible. Booyah! That being said, yeah, gameplay. I actually very much enjoy the gameplay. It is a downfall. To me personally, like I said, I've never played 12, so I have to compare it to 11. It's a major step up from 11. Major step up. But it's a bit of a downfall from Final Fantasy X. Yeah. Story-wise. Not as good as Final Fantasy X storyline. It's not. I think that's another thing that people have problems with. The story. Yeah. I still very much enjoyed the story. I thought the story was great. Like most people complained about, not enough towns. Not enough towns. And other people have said, well, it's because they're on the run all the time. It's like, yes, I understand that, but why can't we take a break and be in a specific town and then, oh shit, they're after us again, and then continue going, and then coming up to another town and doing the same thing. Yeah, no, they didn't do that. They only did it with one town in particular. Yeah. The thing is, Final Fantasy 13, I do find Final Fantasy 13, voice acting wise, I think Final Fantasy 13 actually had voice direction done great. Because that's why I think Final Fantasy 13 did so much better than Final Fantasy 10. Yeah. Graphics, for its time, awesome. Final Fantasy 13 2 was, some people say it's a step up, other people say it's a step down. In a way, for me personally, it felt like a step down. But don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good game. Graphics, for its time, was awesome, as always. I was impressed with how many people were still speaking out storylines, the non people in your battle system, like side people that have like one-liners type thing. A lot of them actually spoke. There was a few texts where no one spoke, but not many, not much. Final Fantasy X-2, I forgot to touch base with that. X-2 was a major letdown too. I still liked it. I thought it was an okay game. I really enjoyed the plot in the game of Final Fantasy X-2. I really enjoyed the plot. My main problem with the game, was not with the graphics. It was not with the gameplay. It was not with the storyline, believe it or not. It was not with the plot. My main problem with that game, too much goal power. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for goal power in video games. But this was just too much. Too much. Yeah. Anyhow, I gotta start wrapping things up. Been rambling on for 35, almost 36 minutes. So, like, yeah, back to 13.2. I think it's a good game. That's it. Final Fantasy 13.3, aka Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. Man. Why do we have to have two names for the game? Man! That pisses me off. Because in the US, it was released as Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. It was released here for about a month as Final Fantasy 13 3. And afterwards, it was renamed Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. Why change it if it's already been released as another title? It's still considered as a Final Fantasy game. It says Final Fantasy in the title, but why call it Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13? That is just plain stupid when you've already released it in that area as Final Fantasy 13 3. Stupid. And it's probably because the game sucked all around. It sucked. The graphics were actually very good. I give it that. The gameplay sucked. The story, when there was story, sucked. It was mainly side quests, which sucked. Oh, and the voice cast. That was actually not that bad. I give it that. I give it that. I think the voice cast actually did a very good job. But that does not save it whatsoever. There was very little main story, and when there was, it sucked. Yeah. Anyhow, you've heard my gripes and rants and stuff about the Final Fantasy games. I'm never going to be doing this again. I decided to do it when I got this. This was only supposed to come in 2 weeks. Not today. No. It arrived tonight. It did. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and stay tuned for more Unpackaging videos to come. I'm sorry about my random waves, but you finally heard all my thoughts about all the Final Fantasy games in the numbered series to date. Bye everyone.